Hello and welcome to Joe and Kat Chats. Today we are talking about men and the civil rights movement. This recording is live. We're recording on February 23rd, 2021 on Facebook and YouTube at /JoeNiceDJ, and find us on all socials at Joe and Kat Chats or on our personal pages at JoeNiceDJ and at CatWells22. So also, we're happy to be part of the Tastemakers Radio on Dash Radio. You can listen live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. So, of course, I'm excited for this topic today. But first, how are you, Joe?
You know what, Kat? It's been an interesting few days. It's been an interesting past few minutes trying to get myself reorganized and get ready for this word, recombobulated. But it is what it is. We are here, proud to be with my sister, Kat Wells, today on another fabulous edition of the historic Joe and Kat Chat series. As you can see on my shirt, I have two civil rights heroes that are on the shirt. Muhammad Ali over here, Malcolm X over here. It's tough to do this in reverse, but we're putting it in reverse. We're doing what we know how to do. Ms. Wells, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm loving that shirt, and I'm excited to talk about both of those people.
And I also have a pair of Martin Luther King Jr. socks on, but I'm not lifting the leg up and getting all yoga with it now because we're not doing that here on the Joe and Kat Chat series. That's the Patreon later on.
There you go, yeah. If that ever gets going.
Page that I haven't started yet, but that's a whole other conversation for another time.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. That'll be alive when we decide to do that. But
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I had a bit of a note that I wanted to say before we start today's episode, because I just want to recognize all of the Black leaders and artists and speakers and writers and all of the Black people who have been very, very busy this month. Something that happens every year is Black people are called upon in February to showcase themselves and their talents in whatever capacity that is. And what that means is that many Black folks are busy in February, and then their work or engagement slows down thereafter. And do you know why that might be, Joe?
I have an idea, but I'd love to hear it from you, please.
Well, February is Black History Month. So what this demonstrates, and I've seen many of the people, the Black folks that I follow, being very exhausted through the month of February because it's sort of this effect of what happened last year with the Black squares on Instagram, where white folks and organizations that are led by white folks, primarily, I should say, are calling upon all of these Black leaders and Black speakers, for the sort of Black History Month, but then they exhaust themselves and I mean, it's wonderful that they're being showcased. The problem that I see with this, though, is that many of those Black folks do not have sustained employment for the rest of the year if there are, depending on what they do. So I just wanted to call that out at the get-go here, because this is, the last week of February. It is Black History Month. We have focused our efforts as well on, highlighting some Black people that we find inspiring. And so, yeah, I want to urge everyone to continue to hire Black people for whatever they do, because that is what we're moving towards. Like, let's maybe tone down the white supremacy, folks.
You know what? I agree with not only toning it down, I also agree with eliminating it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, let's abolish the white supremacy, folks. I should have said.
Toning it down then means it's still kind of there, but we actually don't want it. So
agreed.
There's that, but yeah, there's an emotional labor that comes with being a Black person, especially when you're a Black person in the United States and you have to be the de facto historian for everything that happens or surrounds Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of white people do not understand the the emotional toll and energy it takes from Black people to constantly answer every single question or respond to every single request involving Black folks. And quite honestly, if white supremacy and racism wasn't a situation, there wouldn't need to be a response to the emotional labor and energy that Black people have to spend in order to respond to all of these situations during Black History Month. Because quite honestly, we wouldn't need a Black History Month because Black
Yeah.
history would be treated the same as white history. And quite honestly, there is no real such thing as quote unquote white history because history has always been skewed toward whiteness and been drawn away from Black people. And so much of ignorance comes from a lack of communication and a lack of understanding of language. We have an entire episode on language. Feel free to review that and watch it, listen to it, and take notes, copious notes, because it's a rather academic episode. We dug in, we put our foot down on that one, Kat.
Yes, absolutely.
We went deep. We went deep. But the point is, we want to make sure that we, with every single episode, we not only are sensitive to marginalized communities, not only sensitive to their emotions, but their needs and their desires, but we additionally stand and we represent the marginalized, the oppressed. And with each episode, we make sure that we raise the horizon of aspiration and deepen the well of inspiration.
Yeah, that's so well put. Thank you so much.
You know what? Every once in a while, I get it right.
Lies, you get it right all the time.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that.
Well,
but accuracy is high. We'll just leave it
yeah, there you go. There you go.
We're all right. We're all right.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, Kat Wells, today you and I are going to discuss men and the civil rights movement. A couple of weeks ago, we discussed women in the civil rights movement. We discussed Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, Rosa Parks. We covered a lot of ground in a relative Madam C.J. Walker. We covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and once again, due to time constraints and what we are able to do, we only have a limited amount of time to cover a wonderful group of men that were involved in the civil rights movement. You're seeing them on my shirt right now. Malcolm X over here, Muhammad Ali here, and I want to start today's proceedings with a couple of quotes because I think it's important that everything that happens in life is a function of context. It's where you are based upon where everything else is in relation to who you are and where you are. And of course, I love my books. This is one of my favorite books ever. The name of the book is called Ali Rap. And it's a quote, it's a book of quotes from Muhammad Ali. And in the book, he said this: me, we. Now, he didn't mean we like he's on a roller coaster. He meant we as in the pronoun. Me, we. And he's quoted as having the world's shortest poem. Me, we. When he said that, it's in reference to not himself, but it's in reference to everybody else. It's not about making sure that everything is about him. It's about making sure that he lives a life of service for everybody else. It's not about me. It's about the we. Malcolm X had a quote. He said, if you change the I to we, illness becomes wellness. I'm going to say that again because sometimes if you change the I to we, illness becomes wellness. Take a look at what's happening right now in society. There is a selfishness and a self-centeredness regarding not only the way many of us are living our lives, but the way that the vaccine is being distributed. There's vaccine apartheid across Africa. There is a acquisition of the vaccine in in mostly North America and European countries, and African nations and Southern Pacific nations are being left out of the back. If we sigh and we focus on we, illness becomes wellness. It's community care. It's caring for your own. It's caring for the people around you. That is exactly why we say at the end of every episode, please take care of yourselves and each other.
Yes.
Okay? Because if you're focused on yourself, you're going to be completely unable to take care of those around you. And if you're able to take a look at what's happening around you, the reflection and the karma that comes back to you is going to, you are going to be able to take care of yourself, because you'll have a community.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for those quotes. It's so true, and I think that really does embody sort of how we approach this chat as well. So thank you for making that connection, because it is really important. We do focus on community care and, you know, taking care of the most vulnerable. That's what both of us, you know, believe in and are pushing for with you know, our beliefs and our actions and all of the things that surround this chat. So
absolutely. You might not know this, but many years ago, I took up boxing when I was a little kid. When I was about my mother's age. And I've said this on many occasions. My childhood hero, still to this day, is Sugar Ray Leonard. Watch my Double Doc documentary. I talked about him at length. But the guy he was most inspired by was this gentleman over here, Muhammad Ali. And I want to talk about him for a little bit, because I think it's important that we, you know, discuss him.
Yeah.
He was born on January 17th in 1942 in Louisville, Kentucky. Muhammad Ali was actually not his birth name. His birth name was Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. Once again, Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. And for those that understand history, you will understand that the name Cassius Clay is also the name of a white abolitionist who also shared the same name, Cassius Clay. Now, Cassius Marcellus Clay Sr. was an artist. He was a painter and a sign maker. His mother, Cassius Clay's mother, was a homemaker, took care of the kids. Now, Muhammad Ali grew up in the segregated South, and he witnessed segregation firsthand. At age 12, somebody stole his bike. And this was a $60 Schwinn bike. Now, this is back in 1962. Could you imagine how much money a bike, that the $60 in 1962, that's coin. You're talking
That's
money.
Fancy. That was a good bike.
That's a fancy bike. And somebody stole it from Muhammad Ali. Now, I'm going to read you a quote. Now, 12 years old, an 89-pound Cassius Clay walks into a gym unknowingly and says, I'm going to whoop whoever stole my bike. So a Louisville policeman by the name of Joe Martin looks at him and says, well, you better learn how to fight before you start challenging people that you're going to whoop. Joe Martin was a police officer who was also a boxing trainer. Now, this is in 1952. 2 years later, in 1954, Muhammad Ali, actually back then known as Cassius Clay, won his first amateur match. 2 years after that, he won the Golden Gloves, which is a boxing tournament. And you have to be really good to win the Golden Gloves. In 1960, Cassius Clay won the gold medal in the Olympics. So I want everybody to realize what sort of prodigy Cassius Clay was athletically. 1952, he had never put on a pair of boxing gloves. 8 years later, he wins a gold medal and in the light heavyweight division in the Olympics.
That's amazing.
That's and it's not as if Cassius Clay had an uncle that boxed or a dad that boxed or somebody else. No. There was none of that. He just had God-given ability and knew how to throw a punch and had really good training when he was young. He continued to box, and in 1964, he joined the Nation of Islam. And a major influence on his life in the Nation of Islam is this gentleman over here, Malcolm X. Now, for a short time, when he joined the Nation of Islam, Cassius Clay became Cassius X. Now, when he returned to the United States with a gold medal, he realized that, hey, you know what, I might have a chance at making a living. People won't discriminate against me. Things might be all good. That wasn't the case. He went to Miami and he was refused service at a restaurant in Miami, Florida. And I'm going to read you something that kind of goes to show Ali's wit and his humor, but his sense of the way of the world. He goes into the restaurant and the man says, "We don't serve Negroes." Muhammad Ali says, "I don't eat them either." The restaurant owner said, "Boy, get out." Ali looked at his gold medal and thought, this thing ain't worth nothing. Can't even get me a hand. Muhammad Ali was 19 years old when it happened. 19 years old. So throughout his years, he began to fight against white supremacy. He spoke out against the Vietnam War, and he urged Black people to not be afraid of white people, which I think has a direct connection to Malcolm X. Again, we'll speak about him later on. Ali spoke out against the Vietnam War, and he was drafted in the military in 1967. By then, he had completed his conversion to being a Muslim, and he became what was known as a conscientious objector. And he said, you know what, I'm not going to fight in this war. I'm refusing service. I'm a Muslim minister. I'm not fighting this war based on my religious grounds. And one of his staunchest defenders was a Jewish lawyer who became a sports broadcaster, none other than Howard Cosell, who said, you know what, yeah, Muhammad Ali is right. First Amendment right. He don't have to fight this war if he doesn't want to. Ali was arrested. He lost his boxing license. And for 3 years, in the prime of his boxing career, he was unable to fight. 3 years. And I've watched a bunch of Ali fights. Muhammad Ali, before the layoff, was unbeatable. And I'm saying that just knowing what I know. Muhammad Ali, before the layoff, was unbeatable. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he was able to walk free while he was able to appeal the sentence. So during that time when he was out of the ring for 3.5 years, he continued to train, but he wasn't getting actually punched at. And he spoke out at colleges and anti-war rallies across the country. And at first, the public didn't approve of his anti-war stance. They were just like, look, why come you just can't be like Joe Louis and go fight in this, go serve your country? But then, Joe Louis was never actually placed in harm's way. And Muhammad Ali could have done that. But he chose not to do that because of his principles. There's a famous quote, and he said, I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. None of them ever called me the enemy. At that point, when he made that quote, that cemented his status as a civil rights activist and a civil rights leader. He also said that it costs $12 million a day to stay in Vietnam, and I buy lots of bullets, 3 bombers a year, and pay the salary of 50,000 men, and they pay a lot of money after my fights. What he's basically saying is, look, the government takes a whole lot of money from me from all of my fights. Why are we paying for all of these people that are darker skinned to go ahead and kill other darker skinned people in Southern Asia?
Yeah, exactly.
In 1967, he said, my conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some other darker people or some poor, hungry people in the mud for big, powerful America and shoot them. For what? They never called me the enemy. They never lynched me. They never put little dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality or raped or killed my mother and father. How can I shoot them poor people? Just take me to jail. Muhammad Ali finished his career with 56 wins, 5 losses, and 37 knockouts. And he won the heavyweight title against a guy named Sonny Liston. If you know anything about Sonny Liston's history, Sonny Liston worked for the mob. He was a strong man for the mob. So if you owed the mob money and you didn't pay up, Sonny Liston was the guy knocking on your door. And he was the guy that would break your fingers, break your legs, or do other stuff to you that we're not going to talk about on this show. Ali beat him, knocked him out. Ali lost his first fight to Joe Frazier on March 9, 1971. He ended up beating Joe Frazier twice more to complete the trilogy. The third fight was known as the Thriller in Manila. It was in August of 1975, a year before I was born. watched that fight dozens of times. And there's a couple of documentaries about it. And Ali won because Joe Frazier's corner, and Joe Frazier had a wonderful trainer named Eddie Futch. Eddie Futch was like, "You're not going back after this 15 round. I'm not having you get this much punishment." After the match, Ali wanted to retire. He looked at his trainer, Angelo Dundee, and his top man, Dr. Ferdinand Pacheco, and he said, "This must be what death feels like." And they fought outdoors in the Philippines in the summertime. Could you imagine the humidity?
No, that sounds horrible.
They didn't fight 10 rounds or 12 rounds. They fought 15 rounds. And these were two guys that didn't like each other. The year before, Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman. And George Foreman, much like Muhammad Ali and much like Joe Frazier, was also an Olympic gold medalist. And in 1984, Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He also had spinal stenosis. And he became a philanthropist in 1996. Muhammad Ali lit the Olympic torch. And I remember watching that vividly. It happened in Atlanta, Georgia. And I guarantee you, the millions of people that watched that around the world, there wasn't a dry eye in the world because everybody saw it. Everybody saw it. Muhammad Ali died, I think, in 2016. June 3rd, 2016. And he received a bunch of awards. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's Muhammad Ali. For all of the fights that Muhammad Ali won, and he won 56 of them, and he lost 5 of them, but the losses were really towards the end of his career when the reflexes had slowed and wasn't able to take the punch as well as he used to. The most important fight that he won had nothing to do with anything in the boxing ring. The most important fight that he won was against the Supreme Court. When he stood up to the Supreme Court, he said, "You know what? No, I'm not going against. I'm not shooting these people. I'm not fighting your wars.
Yeah.
I'm not doing what the white establishment wants me to do. I'm standing up for what I believe in." And he was willing to pay a price for that. And the price for that was his career. And in some cases, and there's an old boxing adage where, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, where you either go out on your shield or you get carried out on your shield. And there's some boxers that are willing to just fight, but they're not willing to die for it. Muhammad Ali was willing to die for it. He was willing to die for freedom. He was willing to. When he said it, he meant it. And when he said, "You know what? I'm not going to fight these wars. I don't believe that America should be doing this. We shouldn't be overseas killing darker skins."
Yeah.
He meant it. And when athletes talk about themselves being the GOAT, the greatest of all time, it's blasphemous to even consider any other athlete being greater than Muhammad Ali. Because I don't care if you win 6 NBA championships, if you win 20 Grand Slam tennis tournaments, if you win 7 Super Bowls. Now, Muhammad Ali was willing to give up his career, and if it came to it, his life. And that is the ultimate price that he had to pay for the courage of his convictions. And that is what true greatness is all about. That is the sort of greatness that I think we all should strive for in our lives.
Yeah.
We all need something that we believe in. We all need something that is bigger than us, that we're willing to sacrifice for and fight for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for him, it was freedom for Black people.
Yeah.
For him, it was making sure that he stood up for the downtrodden and the marginalized and the underrepresented.
Yeah.
And against the face of an American empire that wanted him to be obedient and just be part of the status quo. Muhammad Ali didn't want any parts of that. And And that's why I don't care what any other athlete does for their careers. LeBron James could win 12 NBA championships. There's only one GOAT. There's only one greatest of all time, and it's Muhammad Ali.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's a legend. I don't follow boxing, and I respect and admire his stance and his career and all of that too. It's just incredibly amazing what he did. And this is reminding me of someone who has really similar viewpoints that I was able to look into this week for this episode, which is Nelson Mandela, who is also really, really well known. Yeah, so he was born in 1918. At 12 years old in 1930, Mandela became a ward of the Joni Taba, where he would hear stories from elders about wars of resistance, which contributed to his participation in the freedom struggle of his people. He was a bit of a troublemaker because he was expelled, or seemingly a troublemaker, I should say. He was expelled from college for joining a student protest, but later completed his degree at the University of South Africa in his last months of imprisonment in 1989. And so in 1944, Mandela helped to form the African National Congress, the ANC, the Youth League. Through the work of Mandela, he contributed to the ANC to adopt a more radical mass-based policy so that it would be less regionally based. In 1952, he led a campaign of civil disobedience that was a joint program between the ANC and the South African Indian Congress. He and 19 others were charged and sentenced to 9 months of labor and 2 years of political suspension. And he also established South Africa's first Black law practice to fight apartheid cases in 1952. So in 1955, Mandela was involved in drafting the Freedom Charter, a document calling for non-racist social democracy in South Africa. And then in 1956, there was a treason trial. And treason in South Africa at the time was sort of I guess it was a way to force Black South Africans to be controlled. So he was arrested and charged in 1956. There were, it was basically designed to harass anti-apartheid activists. And so he was later acquitted, but it wasn't for, I think, 5 years after that. In March 1960, there was a protest where police killed 69 unarmed peaceful protesters by opening fire on the crowd. They were protesting the pass laws, which forced South Africans, Black South Africans, my apologies, to carry a pass at all times. And these laws were used to control movement of Black South Africans, restricting where they could live and work. And so Mandela was one of the thousands detained during the state of emergency that followed this massacre. And he and his colleagues were acquitted in the trial, also because of the 1956 treason. But they organized right afterward a national strike. So the following year, in June of 1961, Mandela was asked to lead the armed struggle and helped to establish the Spear of the Nation, which is an armed wing of the ANC established after the Sharpeville massacre.
Right.
So in 1962, the following year, he actually left the country to gain support for this armed struggle. But upon returning to South Africa, he was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. So in the following year, in 1963, while on trial following a police raid of the secret hideout used by the ANC and Communist Party activists, Mandela and 10 others were charged with sabotage, treason, and violent conspiracy. So the Rivonia trial, they were given life sentences. And this was the trial where Nelson Mandela stated he was a lawyer, he had a statement that basically said, I didn't write the quote down, but it basically said that he was willing to die for the rights of Black people because he had been harassed and violently, encountered so much violence in his life and saw it of his friends and neighbors and community members and country members. He was one of these incredibly inspiring people, but he got sentenced to life in prison because of that trial. So he had some health issues while he was in prison. He suffered from prostate surgery in 1985. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1988 and served the rest of his sentence until February 11th, 1990, with tuberculosis or recovering from that. During this time, he had refused at least 3 conditional offers of release, which also solidifies the fact that he just felt so deeply that he was not willing to
compromise himself.
Yes, thank you, compromise his ideals. In 91, after he is released from prison, Mandela was elected the ANC president, and his negotiations with the current president at the time, F.W. de Klerk, helped to end South Africa's apartheid system. So in 93, he and President F.W. de Klerk jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And in April of 1994, he voted for the first time in his life as a Black man in South Africa, which is triumphant. In May of 1994, the same year, Nelson Mandela, was inaugurated as South Africa's first democratically elected president. Mm-hmm. And let me just take a moment to let that sink in. May 10th of 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as South Africa's first democratically elected president. He was also Black. In 95, he established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate human rights violations under apartheid, which was a really, persuasive commission because it really revealed a lot. And I put this note here in particular to just repeat the name. It was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is something that a lot of Canadians hear because we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission happen in Canada. It was in the early 2010s that it was completed, and it was about the Indigenous folks and the way they were treated. So I just wanted to point that out because the verbiage used for the commission in South Africa, it actually helped people. It maintained, an anti-apartheid situation politically, although, it's politically, things are volatile all the time in most countries, including in South Africa. But it's just really important that people understand that those words are associated with South Africa, and Canada adopted that. And while our Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada was completed and had many recommendations, none of them have been implemented. And so we need to be aware of that and push our elected officials to actually do something about that, because the Indigenous folks in Canada are suffering. And we've talked about this many times before, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember both when
Mm.
Nelson Mandela was released from jail in May of 1990. I was in eighth grade.
Mm.
I was in eighth grade, and I remember when he was released from prison in 1994. I was a senior in high school.
Oh, when he was elected?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The president. And one of these days, we should probably do an episode about how geopolitically the world has changed over the past 30 years, from 1990 until now.
Yeah.
In that 4 years, we go from Nelson Mandela walking out of a prison with his wife Lily to Nelson Mandela becoming president of it's remarkable that sort of transformation. And
Hmm.
the next person that we want to talk about also had his own transformation. That's none other than Malcolm X. He was born on May 19th, 1925, in none other than Omaha, Nebraska. He was the fourth of eight kids. His father, of course, much like many of the people we've talked about in the previous 3 episodes of the Joe and Cat Chat series, grew up in the church. His father was a preacher, and his father led the local chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Now, Malcolm Little's father, Earl Little, because Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little. Earl Little was frequently harassed, and Malcolm saw the KKK and a splinter group of the KKK called the Black Legion frequently harass his family. Earl and his wife and all 8 kids decided to move from Omaha, Nebraska to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then over to Lansing, Michigan in 1928. In the following year, 1929, a racist mob decided to light the Littles' house on fire. And the all-white emergency responding crew did nothing to extinguish the fire. They let the house burn. So Earl Little took his family again, packed them up, and moved them over to East Lansing, Michigan. Now, in 1931, Earl Little, Malcolm Little's father, was found dead on some train tracks. Nobody knows how this happened, but the family believed that white supremacists killed Earl. Now, Earl, with all of his activism, took out a life insurance policy. But because the death was ruled a streetcar accident by the police, the family was unable to collect on that life insurance policy. The policy was rendered null and void. Malcolm's mother never got over Earl's death, never got over it. And in 1937, Malcolm's mother was committed to a mental institution and spent 26 years in that mental institution. Malcolm, now essentially being orphaned, Malcolm and his 7 brothers and sisters were separated and placed in foster care. In 1938, Malcolm was kicked out of school and sent to a juvenile detention home in Mason, Michigan. He left that and then spent some time with a white family, but then left that white family. And in his book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, he said that he felt like a pink poodle or a pet canary rather than a human being.
What a horrible feeling.
Yeah, yes. He became class president in high school, and then a teacher asked Malcolm, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And Malcolm said, "A lawyer." The teacher said, "Well, come on now, one of life's first needs is to be realistic. You can't, why don't you think of something you can be? Why don't you be a carpenter? All right, why don't you do that instead of trying to be a lawyer?" Malcolm, being young and impressionable, said, "You know what? The hell with it. I'm just going to drop out of school." So he dropped out of school at age 15 and moved to Boston to live with one of his older half-sisters. Her name is Ella. Ella found a job for Malcolm shining shoes at a local establishment. And at the same time, Malcolm found himself selling drugs. Malcolm eventually worked in a kitchen on a train, sold more drugs, and then got involved with the lifestyle, with the nightlife. Began selling drugs, began drinking, and began buying expensive clothes to support his lifestyle. In 1946, Malcolm Little was sentenced to 10 years in jail for various larceny charges. In jail, to kind of make up for the lost education, he decided to read a bunch of books. And inside prison, he joined the Nation of Islam, which were a sect of Black Muslims focused on Black nationalism and the need to separate from white Americans. In 1952, Malcolm Little was released from prison. and changed his name to Malcolm X. Malcolm X traveled to Detroit, Michigan to work with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is the leader of the Nation of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad wanted to spread the Nation of Islam across the United States. X became a minister in a couple of temples in Boston and Harlem, in Hartford, Connecticut, and Philadelphia. And in 1960, he established a national newspaper called Muhammad Speaks. And Malcolm X wanted to end racism by any means necessary. He's quoted as saying, by any means necessary. X also said, you don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the cheek revolution. There is no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. X was militant, and he wanted a violent revolution to establish a Black independent nation. As a result, Malcolm X had a lot of critics and also had a lot of followers. And the membership of the Nation of Islam grew from 400 in 1952 to 40,000 in 1960. And one of Malcolm X's close personal confidants and friends was none other than, of course, Muhammad Ali. Think about in 1952, Muhammad Ali just began to box. In 1960, Muhammad Ali won a gold medal.
Wow.
The correspondent. There is a correlation between the two. In the 1960s, X was somewhat seen as a polar opposite to another person we're going to speak on later in this show, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And there's something to be said for physical confidence. Malcolm X talked violence. He said by any means necessary. Martin Luther King said, you know what? Nonviolent direct action. Malcolm X was 6'3" tall. Martin Luther King was 5'6". When you're that big, you can talk violence because you can back it up. When you're 5'6", you're not going to really talk violence. You're going to say, yo, let's work this out peacefully. There is a difference. Malcolm X had a fallout with Honorable Elijah Muhammad over Elijah Muhammad's insensitive comments about JFK's murder, and he left the group. X went to Mecca, to Northern Africa, and he saw that Northern Africans and people in the Middle East were also struggling. And he decided to gain solidarity with Northern Africans and Middle Easterners and compare their struggle to the struggle that's happening with Black Americans in the United States, was something that I had said on several occasions. He wanted to internationalize the struggle. X made the Hajj, and for those that don't understand Islam, the Hajj is when you go to Mecca and you make the pilgrimage to Mecca and you change the name. And he changed his name to Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Now, when Malcolm X returned to the United States, he became less angry and he had his ideas focused on more peaceful resolutions. In 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated. He was assassinated by Nation of Islam members, and three of those members were found guilty and sentenced to life in jail. Now, in the early 1960s, during Malcolm X's growth, spiritual and emotional political growth, he worked with one of the great authors of the 20th century, gentleman by the name of Alex Haley. Alex Haley, the greatest series of books of all time. He also wrote this book, Biography of Malcolm X. There are important books that I feel everybody should read. Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah.
Fire Next Time by James Baldwin.
Absolutely.
Some of the other books that I've talked about on many occasions. I think another important book that should be read is Reveille for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. This is one of these books that everybody should read. It changes the momentum of people's lives. Malcolm X.
Wow.
Malcolm X. And X wanted to be educated. He said in the book, he said, education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Malcolm X also said that you can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. And so a theme that we've mentioned, we didn't plan this, it just happened. Malcolm X also said, if you're not ready to die for it, put the word freedom out of your vocabulary. And I mentioned that sort of sentiment with regards to Muhammad Ali, how he was willing to die not only in the world, but outside of it for the freedom. And in our first episode, months ago, I mentioned the 4 fights: the fight for humanity, the fight for freedom, the fight for equality, and the fight for survival. What we're seeing right now with Malcolm X and Nelson Mandela and Muhammad Ali is that these were men that were not afraid to die. They were not afraid to stand up for what they believed. They had understood that the end of their physical lives did not mean the end of their relevance, nor the end of their message.
Yeah.
There's a Chechen novelist by the name of Franz Kafka who said the fear of death is the only result of an unfulfilled. The fear of death is the end result of an unfulfilled life. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned Mary Ellen Pleasant. Mary Ellen Pleasant was the mother of civil rights in California, where she started every speech with these words. She said, "I'd rather be a corpse than a coward." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on several occasions said, "I'd rather be dead than afraid." So when we talk about the men that we've discussed so far, and we have time for maybe a couple of more at this point, these were men that stood up for what they believed in, but they were willing to put their lives on the line. They understood that what they were fighting for, humanity, freedom, equality, and survival, was bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's so, I love how you sort of brought things together. I would have never thought of sort of the physical, circumstances leading to or contributing to, your stance as a activist leader of the civil rights movement. But yeah, I mean, it's so funny because you said it wasn't planned, but yeah, this is becoming an emerging theme of this episode, is just like, are you willing to die for the freedom of your brothers and sisters, your community, your people that you're fighting for, because the state will kill you for it. And I think that's something that has been a theme through all of the Joe and Kat chats, because we began this as a response to the police brutality, to the Black Lives Matter movement last year in June of 2020, sorry.
When the state, the police, killed George Floyd.
Exactly. When the police murdered George Floyd, and then there was protests. I mean, and they were met with more state violence from the police.
Correct.
And this is an ongoing issue that we're continuing to talk about. And we're running out of time, and I wish we had more time, but I just want to mention a couple of people. Fred Hampton was also someone that was a very prominent name.
Who was also killed by the police. He was nicknamed the Black Messiah. He was the Black Panther leader. Him and his family knew Emmett Till, which is sort of a note I wanted to mention, because we've been talking about each of these people's sort of, history that brings them to where they are at. And so seeing that at a young age, I'm sure would have radicalized Fred Hampton. He was encountered many violent, circumstances with police during rallies and demonstrations, as part of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, Illinois. He became a deputy chair of the Black Panther Party Illinois chapter and formed the Rainbow Coalition in Chicago. And let me see if there's anything else I want to highlight. I mean,
J. Edgar Hoover, who was the FBI director at the time, considered Hampton a threat as an emerging messiah, quote unquote, among others, which I think we need to talk about MLK Jr., Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad were also on that list of sort of FBI wanted people of the time.
Yes.
So,
yes. And you mentioned MLK. He's going to be the last person we talk about today because time is running out. He was Martin Luther King Jr. was born Michael King, January 15th, 1929. He was the middle child of three, and much like many of the people we've talked about in the previous three episodes, Martin Luther King Jr.'s father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a preacher, and MLK Jr. was baptized at the age of 5. His father opposed any form of class superiority. He wanted everybody to be equal. In May of 1941, Martin Luther King Jr.'s grandmother died, and it was a difficult death. And Martin Luther King Jr. attempted suicide by jumping out of a second-story window. King ended up surviving. He was okay. King was an excellent student, and he was such an excellent student, he skipped the 9th and 11th grades of high school and started college at the age of 15 at Morehouse College. And during questioned religion, just didn't want to be like his dad. But then his junior year of school, he took a Bible course, and it renewed his faith and led him to a path of following in his father's footsteps. King became valedictorian of his college class. He eventually earned a sociology degree. And then he traveled to Boston to begin his doctoral studies. He met a singer and an actress named Coretta Scott. They got married and had 4 children. They got married in 1953. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. became a pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, and he earned his doctorate at the ripe old age of 25 years of age. Imagine.
Wild.
At 25.
Wow, good for him.
Imagine starting college at 15. That's what he did. He started college at 15 and got a doctorate at 25.
Wow.
King was heavily involved in the Montgomery bus boycott and eventually led the Montgomery bus boycott. We talked about that during the Rosa Parks segment of the Women and the Civil Rights Movement a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about the length of the boycott. It lasted 382 days. And because of King's leadership and charisma, his home was frequently attacked by white supremacists in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, King and Ralph Abernathy and approximately 60 other preachers in the South formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And this group was designed to convene the power of churches to form nonviolent protests and to promote civil rights reform. In 1959, King traveled to India and met with Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma is actually not his first name. Mahatma is a title, it's an honorific. His real name is Mohandas K. Gandhi. And he met with Mahatma Gandhi to gain a greater understanding of nonviolent direct action and activism. And when King returned to the United States, that excursion increased his commitment to the civil rights struggle in the United States. Now, in 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. led the Greensboro Sit-In. Greensboro Sit-In is when a bunch of college students sat in at local restaurants where they were denied service. And they would purposely get arrested. And the denial of service would lead to bad press, would lead to protest and eventually led to change. Now, those sit-ins started in Greensboro, North Carolina at a local Woolworths. It also spread to a couple of diners near Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And the sit-ins ended racial segregation at lunch counters in 27 cities. In 1960, King and 75 other students went to a department store and wanted lunch. They were told to get out. They didn't go anywhere. 36 of those people, the students, were arrested in addition to Dr. King. The mayor saw the public backlash and essentially the charges were dropped. At the same time, John F. Kennedy Jr. heard the news that about King being placed in jail, and King was in jail because of the traffic violations that he didn't let him out. And Kennedy placed a call to his wife, Coretta Scott King, and there was massive political pressure, and King was eventually released from prison. In 1963, we all know about the letters from Birmingham and the demonstration that took place afterwards. Martin Luther King said, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue." Later that same year, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave the I Have a Dream speech. And at that point, people around the United States began to question Jim Crow laws and the second-class treatment of Black people in the United States. The following year, 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize. And in future years, King continued to lead protests across the South. But in the North, his nonviolent approach to racial justice and social reform was somewhat frowned upon, because in the North, they were considerably more militant, and they viewed the nonviolent direct action approach as weak and ineffective. Later in life, King, much like a Fred Hampton, began to connect the racial struggle with class and poverty. More than anything, Martin Luther King not only said, "Hey, you know what, I have a dream," but he also wanted economic freedom.
Mm-hmm.
To the person you mentioned before, Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King spoke out against the Vietnam War, much like Muhammad Ali. King began to broaden his base by forming a multiracial coalition, otherwise known as a Rainbow Coalition, to address the adverse economic conditions of disadvantaged people.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, you know what, yeah, he already knew that Black people had it bad economically, but he also saw that there were a whole bunch of white folks that weren't doing too well in the banking either. He wanted to help them also. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated by James Earl Ray at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. On April 3rd, the night before his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. basically foreshadowed his death. He said, "Hey, you know what? I might not make it to the mountain." He spoke about that. And Martin Luther King is, without question, the most influential civil rights leader this country has ever seen.
Yeah.
There are schools named after him. There are parks named after him. I live near him.
Yeah.
There's a Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard near where I live. There's a memorial named after him. You remember the Irish band U2?
Mm-hmm.
A song called "In the Name of Love." The third verse. One morning, April 4th, shots rang out in a Memphis sky. They could not take my pride. In the name of, that song was about Martin Luther King Jr. Yeah. We talked about Stevie Wonder about a week ago, and the Hotter Than July album, and the song "Happy Birthday," which was a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He led an incredible life, and him and a few of the other people we've spoken about had their lives cut short,
Yes.
way too short by state violence or radical violence, and that's just horrifying. But we're running out of time, so Joe, thank you so much for everything this week. I wish we could have spoken about much more. We have other people we want to talk about, but I encourage everyone to do your research. And as always, thank you for listening to this episode. We do these because we care about each and every one of you. So take care of yourselves and those around you. Please like and share and subscribe on all our socials at Joe and Cat Chats, and subscribe to Tastemakers Radio on the Dash Radio app. Thank you so much. Bye.